Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is the 28th day of June. It is a Tuesday in the year 2016, and it is once again my pleasure to be with you here for a live visit at the Virtual Center. I hope everybody is doing well. I think all of us are appreciating the fact that in this area, at least, that there's a little bit of sunshine. And it's not raining. Lord have mercy, it's not raining. So I think that kind of lifts everybody's spirits a little bit. And there's so much cleanup and rescue and search going on in this area that the fact that we're looking at hopefully 2 or 3 days without any rain, I think is going to be a blessing, especially to the people that have been working day and night on these things, the responders and the police, and I know that have been pulling double shifts, and it's just been a strain on everybody, and making sure that those people that have been driven from their homes can have access to a shower and clean clothes and drinking water and food and cleaning supplies and all the rest of it. So I think once again, West Virginians are proving what West Virginia is all about, and it just seems a shame that they have to prove it so often. It's when you think about it over the years, it seems like more than any other state, the folks in this state are being asked to do even more with less once again. So anyway, first of all, let me apologize for the fact that we did run into some severe technical difficulties yesterday related to the internet, and we did see a notice that Frontier Communications was projecting and having all sorts of problems yesterday because of the weather and the fact that it was raining here in Hinton, where my wife's home was, and I mentioned that to you. The home that was destroyed last week, they had 2.7 inches of rain yesterday. So I mean that's just overkill, no question. We here in the Beckley area where I'm broadcasting from, we received a little bit more than a half an inch. It seemed like more than that, to be honest with you. It rained very hard. But at least last night the reports were that Hinton received something in the area of 1.7 inches of rain, so 2.7 inches of rain. So that's difficult. And the fact of the matter is, in our second hour yesterday, we ran into some serious internet problems. Let me assure you, I finished the program, but when it was over, I kind of received word from the folks from Bob Kincaid and the folks at Head On that we missed a lot of the second hour. So again, I'm gonna assume that much of what we did at least in the second hour yesterday didn't come across and was not captured. So I'm going to try as best I can to recreate some of that. And when you do this, you never do it as well as you did the first time, it seems. So one would think that the more frequently you do something, the better you get at doing it. In this particular kind of situation, I've found over the years that that's not true. The example that I would use is in the years that I was teaching history, more often than not, it would happen that I would teach more than one section of the same class. I would be having 2 or sometimes 3 sections of the same class, which means that you have one preparation, and that's really a stroke of luck when you can, when you have 3 classes and you try to keep them all together so they're all doing about the same thing each time. But the fact of the matter is, you go in and you teach a class the first time and it goes successful. It goes very well. and you have a very good feeling about how things went. And then you go in for the second time and you presume that it'll be even better, and it's never as good. It just isn't. Things don't click right. The enthusiasm and the energy is not there, something. But it seems very, very difficult to recreate a degree, a level of passion and focus that sometimes is there the first time. So, but I'll do the very best I can, and I trust that you'll bear with us and use the opportunity to participate in the program. We have a phone number, and we would love to hear from you. And I think that some of this stuff is incredibly important. Some of this so-called Brexit stuff, and I think there's so much symbolism and so many implications to our political system here in the United States and the elections that are coming and the candidates that we've been talking about and focusing on for so many weeks and months. I think there's all sorts of ideas and information and things we can learning opportunities, if you will, from some of the things that have happened in the last 4 or 5 days with the vote in Great Britain. So with that, I do want to return to that, but I also want to make sure that you know that there is an opportunity for you to weigh in on some of this I think important material. We have a phone number, and it's there principally so that you can get on the air and you can share your thoughts, concerns, ideas, questions, observations, whatever, with our listeners. Not just with me, but with our listeners. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663 HORN, HORN 4676. If you feel that you have something that you would like to say on these issues, but are a little bit uncomfortable to go on the air live, I can quite understand that. I invite you to drop me an email and share your thoughts with me one-on-one via email. I promise that I will answer you. I'll do the very best I can to respond as intelligently as I can, depending on what the issue is and what the question is or the occasion is for me to comment. But I will do that, and I will also make what you say available to our listeners here on the program if it seems to be something that they might benefit from hearing. And the reality is, undoubtedly, it would be something that our listeners would benefit from hearing. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN, 906@gmail.com. And finally, I do request, but I invite you to keep an eye on our Facebook page. I put a little something on it this morning. I've gotten a number of comments to it. It was very short. It was about an EPA report that came out within the last 24 hours, which documented the realities that fracking does indeed affect the quality of drinking water. For longer than we can remember, the oil and gas industry, has denied that what they are doing related to fracking has any negative impact on the quality of drinking water at all. Well, the EPA has put out a report, and they've refuted those allegations. So now the ball's back in the industry's court. And I just made an observation that when it was coal that was the topic of interest, the industry came up with these long-term promises about the benefits and the possibilities of clean coal. And so it seems to me, as far as improving the quality of drinking water, my guess is that it won't be long before the industry reassures us that this is a problem that they are well capable of solving. But be that as it may, I think the report is very significant. Of course, that's not the report that's getting most of the attention on the networks right now. The final Benghazi report is the one that's getting the attention. And I've watched a number of conversations and issues, and the media is going through the report with a fine-tooth comb, and basically the conclusions that, at least preliminary conclusions are, it's only been out a couple of hours, that while there's additional information in there, there really isn't anything earth-shattering that we didn't know before. And you remember that Hillary Clinton spent so many hours, 10 hours or so, before the Benghazi committee, did a yeoman job responding to the committee then. So anyway, and of course this is a political issue as much as anything else. One of the things that as an aside, one of the things that seemed to have come out with it is that in order to cast a preemptive strike, as it were. In other words, in order to get something out before the final report of the Republican majority on the committee came out, the Democrats on the committee put out their own report. And in the process, they apparently revealed some information which is probably going to be embarrassing to Hillary Clinton. And that is that Sidney Blumenthal, her long-term friend and supporter, apparently was on the payroll, was on the Clinton payroll for a substantial amount of money, something in the area of $200,000 a year. And chances are that the release of this information by the Democrats is going to be seized upon by Republicans and used for political purposes. And the irony is that once it was out, the Democrats tried to redact it. But the New York Times pointed out that all you had to do was copy and paste and get rid of the redact, and there was the information. So they didn't do a very good job hiding it. First of all, they didn't do a very good job by even releasing it. But that's something else again. Anyway, let's. I remind you, I'm sure you don't need to be reminded that this is Tuesday and we have started our program 30 minutes later today than we do on Mondays and Wednesdays. And we usually try to offset that by not having our break at the top of the hour. And of course, right now, the top of the hour is just a little bit better than 15 minutes away. So my thinking is that we'll just kind of ignore the need for a break and try to go the full time and recoup a little bit of the half hour that we've lost on our Tuesday program. So with your permission, and again, if you if you do have something or an issue that you'd like to raise or a point that you'd like to make, by all means, please feel free to use the number, the phone number, area code 304-663-4676. As you know, yesterday we were spending most of our time, both hours, on the decision that the British people made at the polls last Thursday to leave the European Union. And we pointed out yesterday that the vote to leave was clearly a surprise. Most of the experts predicted that while the vote would be close, it looked like the majority vote would be to remain within the European Union. And part of the reason for that is quite obvious. Most of the most significant and important people supported it. In other words, the fact of the matter is the vote to leave was clearly a protest vote. It was a protest against the European Union. It was a protest against the controls that the European Union was imposing on Great Britain. The result was that those people who were advocating the vote to leave made the case that this was a vote for British independence, that this was, in a sense, a declaration of independence from the European Union that the citizens of Great Britain rendered at the polls on Thursday. We talked about the fact that when the vote was going on Thursday, the predictions were that while it was going to be close, that would mean that the results of the election probably wouldn't be available till Friday morning. Fact of the matter is, the results of the election weren't as close as they predicted, so consequently, it was quite clear Thursday night that the vote was going to turn out in favor of leaving. And I might say, and this is just an aside, because as each day goes by, we're learning more and more about this particular issue and about this particular vote and about what was going on within Great Britain that precipitated and formed the background of this particular vote. Yesterday on our program, one of the things that I shared was a piece that I had read, and it's among numerous pieces that I read, so I can't cite the source. But one source that I looked at made the point that when you peeled away the curtain, so to speak, and really looked at the guts, the essence of this particular vote, it seemed clear that David Cameron, Prime Minister, the great British Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party in Parliament, was actually responsible for this vote, because the vote was a protest vote from within his own party. And the fact of the matter is, many of those individuals, those people within his own party, were threatening to bolt the party on a number of important issues and votes. And in order to hold his party together, and as you know in Great Britain, when the party in power loses the confidence of the majority, then the government falls and there's a re-election. So what Cameron did in order to hold his party together and hold the government together, as it were, was he promised these incendiaries within his own party that if they stuck with him and stuck with the conservative majority, then he would concede that this referendum would be held. In other words, he basically said to them, if you don't do anything now, if you stay with us, I promise that when we get many of these major issues out of the way, we will give you the opportunity in a national referendum to make a final decision on membership in the European Union. So in a sense, what that means is that the vote, the referendum on Thursday, was kind of a political compromise from the Prime Minister. And it was obviously a compromise that turned out and bit him in the butt, so to speak. And what we talked about yesterday was the fact that with emotions running this high, most of the wisdom suggests that when emotions are high and feelings are strong, and there's substantial anger and frustration and angst within the electorate, that's not the time to hold a referendum. In fact, the founders tell us in this country, Madison tells us, Hamilton tells us in the Federalist Papers, that that's exactly the wrong time to hold a referendum. Because chances are that you've got a good chance at losing the vote, and that's exactly what happened Thursday. And I mentioned Federalist number 49, and if you remember, that was the Federalist paper written by Madison in which he was somewhat critical of Thomas Jefferson. Because Jefferson had recommended the calling of convention, of a constitutional convention or a convention to amend the Constitution when the time was ripe. Jefferson made the point that in a republic, in a government in which the people participate actively in making the decisions for the nation as a whole, it's important to keep the people involved. And so Jefferson was much more inclined to turn to the people when there was conflict or consternation within government. And Madison took him on in Federalist number 49 and argued against this. And Madison's point was that the last thing you want to do is call a convention to amend the Constitution when the nation's emotions are high. When people are extremely angry or extremely frustrated, or extremely irritated, or extremely excited. And the reason is that they, at that time, are usually vulnerable to the power and the appeal of demagogues. That's when the people become most susceptible to the arguments and the persuasion of demagogues. And that's not the time that you want to bring the people in and ask them to make a monumental decision about the nature of the government or the Constitution or the future direction of the nation or anything else. That's exactly the time when you don't want to do that. And the fact of the matter is, it appeared that that's the concession or the political compromise that David Cameron made. So in a sense, if you want to be picky about this and negative, you could say that David Cameron himself bears the brunt of the responsibility for what happened on Thursday. And the fact of the matter is, no sooner did it happen than he announced that he would resign at the end of September or in October. So it seems to me that the fact that he's willing to step aside and get out of the way this quickly seems to suggest that he himself knows that this is a situation he better step aside and let happen, because the damage has been done. Before we went on the air today, I went to Federalist number 49, and I reproduced the paragraph in question. It's the next to last paragraph in Federalist number 49. So-called, the word that is often used for next to last is penultimate. Madison says, in such a posture of things, in other words, when the public is inflamed positively or negatively about a particular issue or series of issues, in such a posture of things, the public decision might be less swayed by prepossessions in favor of the legislative party. But still, and he's talking about the idea of calling a convention, he said, but still, it could never be expected to turn on the true merits of the question. When the public attitude, the public spirit is like this, when the public is excited or inflamed or angry or in a movement to revolt or rebel or something like that, then chances are the issue on the table is never going to be decided on its own merits, because the situation, the environment is too charged. It's too electric. People are too excited. He said inevitably it would be connected with the spirit of pre-existing parties or of parties springing out of the question itself. It would be connected with persons of distinguished character and extensive influence in the community, In other words, at times like this, when the people are emotional and excited, that's the time when influential people can step forward and take control. That's not the time that you want to vote on a very involved, controversial issue. And leaving the European Union for Great Britain was probably the issue of issues. Not the time to do it. Madison said it would be pronounced by the very men who had been agents in or opponents of the measures to which the decision would relate. In other words, the very people responsible for inflaming the electorate would be the people who would take over and control the convention if you call it. Therefore, you don't do it. You don't give them that opportunity. You don't give them that kind of a forum. And then Madison makes the statement, which I've quoted before here at the Virtual Center a number of times, because I think it's a very, very important statement. Madison says, "The passions, therefore, not the reason of the public, would sit in judgment. But it is the reason alone of the public that ought to control and regulate the government. The passions ought to be controlled and regulated by the government." We found in the last paper that mere declarations in written constitutions are not sufficient to restrain the several departments within their legal rights. What Madison is saying then is that in a popular government, government must respond to the reason of the people, but it can never afford to respond to the passions of the people. And that's exactly the situation that happened in Great Britain on Thursday. And the entire world is reeling as a result. The markets have plunged. People's retirement savings and investments have been damaged. And it looks like the markets are beginning to recover today, but for many people, and usually what we mean is the most vulnerable people, the damage has been done, and the next quarterly report, if you will, that comes out on their 401ks or their IRAs or whatever is going to reveal the damage. I don't even want to see mine. Because once you are already retired, you really are in a position where you can't do anything to offset something like this. You are, in effect, quite vulnerable. So, anyway, that's the issue. And I mentioned that there's been a number of things going on, and each day, it seems like, we learn more and more about this particular situation. A couple of things that I've picked up in my reading over the last 24 hours, which I think is significant to this particular issue. One is that the immediate analyses of the election returns, of the vote itself, suggests that the vote to leave the EU was principally a vote by the older people. And it appears that the young were the ones who were strongest for staying within the EU. In other words, this is a split. And I ask you to think about the discussions and the debates that we've had and the articles that many of us have seen in recent weeks and months about the people that are supporting Donald Trump. The people who are most frightened and most angry and most determined to send a message to the establishment. It's the middle class. It's the working class people that seem to be getting the short end of the stick. The economy has recovered from 2007, 2008. But the middle classes aren't getting the benefits of the recovery. Almost all the money that's been generated as part of the recovery is going to the upper 1%. And that's frustrating. And there's no question that the people that are most frustrated are the people that are supporting Donald Trump. He's become their way to strike a blow against the establishment, against change, against trade agreements, against the global economy, against the movement of jobs out of the nation, and the fact that they're not being replaced as traditionally they were replaced by other jobs and other working opportunities. And the result is that people are being rendered useless, to use Richard Sennett's term. People are being rendered inconsequential and irrelevant to the future. They're losing their jobs. They're losing their standard of living. They're losing their retirements. They're losing hopes for the future. They're losing faith in the idea of the American dream. They're losing faith in the idea that their children, the next generation, will be better off than they were. In fact, it's becoming clear that this is the first generation that we've looked at in which people believe that they're going to be worse off than the last one. And so many of the people who are the most frustrated and the most frightened, the people that feel helpless, are really the ones that are driving the support for Donald Trump. And the fact of the matter is, the depth of the emotion, the depth of the anger and the frustration and the fear that drives these people is revealed in the fact that it doesn't seem to matter what Donald Trump says about anybody. He can insult women, he can insult Mexicans, he can insult Muslims, he can insult the disabled. It doesn't matter who he insults, whether his comments are racist or sexist or whatever. It doesn't seem to matter to anybody. Because in the mind of these people, he's the instrument they need to strike a blow at change, at the kind of world that seems to be surrounding people and potentially overwhelming people. They can't get jobs. They don't have the skills. There's no place to go. Many people are working 2 and 3 jobs in order to just minimally get by. The average salaries over the last 10 to 20 years for the middle classes have actually declined, while the 1% and the well-educated and others are doing fabulously well. You see it in our society. The restaurants are filled. Here in West Virginia, for example, the economy is in horrible shape. As so many people who earn their income from coal have lost their jobs. Not just miners, but all of those people whose jobs are related to coal-related industries and operations. There are large numbers of people here in this region who have not only lost their jobs, but who don't seem to have any chance in the world of getting another one. At least not one that pays anywhere near the one they lost. There are jobs, and of course many people who tend to dismiss these kinds of concerns are writing it off to laziness and suggesting that many of these people are just looking to get on the take, looking for entitlements, if you will. The fact of the matter is, what they say is, if you look at the paper, there are plenty of jobs. Minimum wage jobs, fast food jobs, but they don't come close to the quality of the jobs that these people lost, or to the income that these people have lost. So what we see here is an incredible dichotomy. We see large numbers of people without jobs and without hope. But at the same time, there's an element of society in this region as well as in others who are doing fine. The engineers and the entrepreneurs and the, this, that, and the other. And so basically, the restaurants are doing well. Restaurants aren't closing because they're losing clientele. The parking lots are packed every night at some of the best restaurants. And so what we see is a dichotomy. A significant portion of the population is in trouble. The other portion of the population doesn't even seem to realize it because they personally haven't felt it yet. And I guess what I'm saying is, it seems to me the more I read about the vote in Great Britain, the more one can transpose these perspectives that are true here within our country onto that vote. It stands more and more to reason that people feeling the same kinds of things there are the ones responsible for this vote to leave the EU. They are voting against immigration. They are voting against the number of immigrants that are coming into their country. They are angry because, as many of us know, Great Britain has socialized medicine. The National Health Service is available. But more and more, there are complaints coming from working people that they can't get appointments with their doctors because the immigrants are flooding the National Health Service. And so they're being asked or required to wait longer and longer periods of time to get health service. So they want to find ways to stop the immigration. If you want to call it racist, they're willing to be called racists. But the fact of the matter is, they feel that their society is being overrun by immigrants who are coming into the country and are willing to work for minimal wages and making it impossible for these people to ever have any hope of recovery. So they want out. They believe that many of these things are being directed from Brussels. They believe that many of the decisions directly affecting their standard of living, their way of life, are being made by councils and committees and commissions that they didn't vote for. And so their argument is the only way to get out of this and to stop it is to exit the European Union. And they did that. And now the entire world is wrestling with the results. So one thing that is becoming very clear, even in the preliminary analyses of the voting, the vote itself, is that this is an age-related vote. It seems to be people from 45 to 65 and 70 that are the bulk of those who voted to leave. Most of the well-educated, most of the young professionals voted to stay because they look at the kind of world that is taking shape with international trade and economic growth on a worldwide basis and all the rest of it. They see that as opportunity. But the people who are losing their jobs see it as a threat. And they want to stop it. And this was their way to stop it. just like Donald Trump, is the way to stop it here in the minds of many people. And so, and this is the historian in me talking, because I've seen arguments made around this theme before. You can almost look at this situation as a crisis between the past and the future, as a crisis over change. For a long time in our schools, in our colleges, in our professions, in industry, in corporations, we've been encouraging people, young people, to embrace change. Don't try to resist it. Embrace it. Master it. Control it. Find a way to prevail in the face of change, because it's always going to be there. And then you have this other group that is so frightened by change that they dig in their heels and they do everything they can do to stop it. Keep out the Muslims. Keep out the terrorists. Keep out the Mexicans. Keep out the drugs. Keep out the foreigners. Bring back our manufacturing jobs. Eliminate the international trade agreements. So when Donald Trump talks about making our country great again, when Donald Trump talks about bringing back manufacturing, bringing back coal, that's what many people want to hear. They want to hear somebody that offers them hope to stop this change. And they're more than willing to risk being called racists and sexists and homophobes and everything else, because the issue was that important. It doesn't matter how inconsistent or contradictory Donald Trump is. It doesn't matter that he says one thing one day and another thing another day, that he seems to lie all over the place, that he gives speeches and then the next day the media points out that there were X number of out-and-out lies in what he said. It was full of half-truths and innuendos and all the rest of it. These people don't care. They absolutely don't care. Because the issue has gone way beyond the finer rudiments of debate and discord and honesty and ethics and all the other things that seem to drive conversation and civility in our society or in any other society. So in a sense, it seems, you could say that what we're witnessing is the clash between the new civilization that is emerging and those people who are desperately trying to hang on to the past and to control, if not out and out, stop change. Historians have done that in the past with numerous issues. A number of people have written on the Civil War here in America and talked about the war between the agricultural cotton-producing South and the manufacturing, finance-heavy East and North as the struggle between the nation's past and its future. Many people have seen it as the beginning of the end for agriculture in this country. That more and more, with the application of science to agriculture and crossbreeding and all the rest of it, it became possible to raise more food and cultivate more crops on less and less land. Therefore, it took fewer and fewer farmers to feed more and more people, as many people in rural America were flooding to the cities to get the manufacturing jobs. In other words, what industrialism presented to America in the late 19th century is the new future. And we see much in our history of the efforts of farmers to slow down or stop that history, first through legislation then through rebellion, the populist movement, the very, very volatile elections of the late 90s, the labor strikes of the late 90s, as working people were rebelling against an economy and a political situation in which they were being denied all their presumed rights and all their presumed liberties in the face of the corporate desire for unlimited profit. So we saw the struggle between working people and corporate America, the struggle between the industrial future and the agricultural past. And that's kind of tantamount to what we're seeing here, the same kind of thing. In fact, I can attest to the fact that in my own situation, when I wrote my dissertation on the Constitution of the United States, I wrote it on the struggle over the Constitution in the state of Maryland. And a major thesis or theme of my dissertation was the difference between the northern portions, the northern counties in Maryland, who were pretty much dominated and driven by Baltimore, by the city of Baltimore. The growth and expansion of Baltimore and the merchant community there and the banking community and the investors. In other words, the northern counties of Maryland were much more like Philadelphia and New York and Boston than they were like the South. But on the other hand, the southern counties along the Potomac River that raised tobacco and wheat and those kinds of crops were agriculture. That was the past. Those southern counties were drawn to the south. And so in essence, my thesis was that actually the state of Maryland was the dividing point between north and south. And you could see it in the debates over the Constitution, and of course 100 years later, you saw it in the Civil War itself. And so, again, it seems to me we're seeing this popular theme. And when I say popular, I mean one that historians have gone to numerous times in the past. We're seeing this played out in this vote in Great Britain as the world struggles to come to grips with the reality of what's happened. A further thing that I think bears watching, I think this really bears watching, and that is the political fallout and the political reverberations within Great Britain itself. Prominent heads are rolling. Not only did David Cameron promise to resign, but yesterday there was a vote of no confidence in the leader of the Labour Party, because the argument was he didn't do enough for the vote in order to influence the vote to stay within the EU. In other words, many of the Labour folks believe that the head of their party was in part responsible for the outcome of the vote. So they voted no confidence in him. The irony of the situation, however, is while he has no confidence among his colleagues in Parliament, he's one of the most popular figures in Great Britain amongst the people at large. He's the hero of working people in Great Britain, in the industrial cities, in Manchester and London and many of the other industrial cities and working cities in England. So the irony of the situation is that while he has been stung by a no confidence vote among his colleagues in Parliament, the fact of the matter is he's still the most popular figure in British politics right now. And so the thinking is that he's just going to go back to the people and he's going to get reelected. The people are going to put him back. So that's interesting. Another factor that may be even more interesting is that it's becoming very clear as you look at the responses, the official responses in Great Britain, that the leaders of the side that won, the leaders of the Leave, the EU forces, didn't have a plan. They really don't have a plan to make this work. It appears that their thinking never went beyond the vote itself. Different groups, in other words, there's not a party or one group, one united, organized group that was responsible for this vote to leave the EU. It appears that the vote was the product of a number of different groups and constituencies which had only one thing in common, and that was to vote to get out of the EU. But the fact of the matter is, now that they've won, there seems to be no sense of direction. There seems to be no plan. And so in essence, what we're seeing is a successful victory by the forces of opposition. But now that they are in the driver's seat, there's nobody that seems to have a driver's license. Interestingly enough, it's kind of like the Republican Party in this country. As long as they were the out party criticizing the Democrats who were in power, the Republican Party seemed viable. They seemed to have positions and ideological perspectives that made sense to a lot of people. And lo and behold, for various reasons which we won't go into right now, they were able to take over first the House and then most recently the Senate. And the fact of the matter is, government has been tied up in knots since they took over. And some people are beginning to conclude that these people are really born to be out of power critics rather than people who can govern or lead. We've seen this here in West Virginia. We've had a Republican-controlled legislature for the last 4 years in this state. After 84 years of Democratic rule, and for 84 years, the Republicans in West Virginia have been criticizing the in party, the Democrats. And what they've been saying is, if we get them out and give us a chance, we'll show the people of West Virginia what we're talking about. We'll show them policies and programs that can work. So lo and behold, West Virginia shifted over the last 4 years from a solid blue state to a solid red state. And we have had budgetary crisis in West Virginia ever since. The legislative session ended this year without a budget. There was a special session of the legislature to pass a budget called by the governor that met for more than 3 weeks at a cost to the taxpayers of $35,000 a day. In other words, in a state with no revenue, these people cost the state in excess of $500,000 for a special session to pass a budget, which is the principal reason that the regular session of the legislature came into being anyway. The major job of legislatures here in West Virginia during the 60-day session is to pass a budget, and they didn't do it. They had all of these ideologues and all of these groups within the Republican majority. All of them wanted their own way. They couldn't compromise. They couldn't reach across the aisle. They criticized those who wanted to reach across the aisle. And the result is they couldn't get anything done. Exactly the same thing that was going on in Washington. Now it appears that Great Britain is in for the same thing. That now the decision to leave the EU has been made. Now it almost seems these people are throwing up their hands and say, what the hell do we do now? Wow. It's fascinating. Yesterday, during the portion of the program that I think most of you were unable to hear because of our internet problems, and I think we lost it, we were addressing yet another issue related to this one, I think an important one. And let me see if I can explain exactly what I mean. From everything that we've said so far, the difference between those people who want to stop change and those people who want to embrace it, the struggle between those who want to hold on to the past and those who want to forge bravely into the future. The implication seems to be that there are two choices. We either go this way or we go that way. And one of the things we addressed yesterday toward the end of our program is the fact that there really are three choices. And the third choice, and I would argue the most meaningful, logical, and potentially successful choice, is progressivism. I see progressivism as the answer to these issues. I see the potential conflict between generations as being the fact that those who are moving rapidly into the future, into the world of global communications, into the world driven by the internet, into the world driven by the communications and information revolution, the world of Twitter, if you will, are moving rapidly, and they have not paid concern to the people or to the groups that they are leaving behind. It is their blindsidedness, if you will, their unwillingness to think, their unwillingness to consider the needs and fears of others that are causing this problem. The whole idea of progressivism is driven by one basic idea. It's one that we've returned to here at the Virtual Center over and over and over and over again. And it is when the founders created this republic, when the founders adopted this Constitution and this system, they basically devised a government, a popular government, a government of mass participation that was based on the idea that government's job is to govern for the public interest. Not the private interest, but the public interest. And what we have experienced is a situation where private interests have taken over control of government and they have turned it into their own private property. They have turned government, everybody's government, away from the majority of the people and made it their servant, their agent. They have pushed the idea that private property is an unalienable right. They have pushed the idea that government's job is to protect their property, protect their investments, not overtax them, but rather give them special breaks. Over the last several weeks, we've been looking by letters written by James Madison in the National Gazette in 1792, in which Madison saw what government was doing under the plan, the economic development plan of Alexander Hamilton. And what Madison saw was that the financial and manufacturing and mercantile interests in this country were taking control of government and using it only to benefit themselves. And Madison made the point when he was talking about parties, about the emergence of a Republican opposition in the first Congress. Madison made the point that government's job is to govern for everybody, not just a few people. I would suggest to you that that is the major campaign theme, that has been the major campaign theme of Bernie Sanders. If you look at the issues and the points, the positions on issues that Sanders has advocated throughout this primary season, you can begin to see a common theme, a common thread. And that thread is that government's job is to govern for the public interest, not solely for the private interest. Madison had said in 1792, the well-to-do, the wealthy people, the upper classes, don't need special assistance from government. They don't need tax breaks. They don't need corporate independence. They sure as hell don't need to be treated as humans, as persons, for purposes of freedom from government regulation and government control. Madison's whole idea was that the only way a Republican government can work is when government worked in the best interests of all the people. Government's job is to minimize inequality, not feed it. Not stand back and let it happen, but control it. To redistribute wealth. Remember Madison's 5-point formula for guaranteeing that Republican government can work in America. He put this in the newspaper in January of 1792. Government must do everything that it can do to put pressure on those at the top and force them down towards the middle. And government must at the same time do everything it can do for those at the bottom to help lift them up. The outcome being that inequality is minimized and the implication and the faith of the people at large is that government is doing all it can do in the interests of all the people and everybody has a fair chance and equal opportunity. That's what people must believe. If they don't really believe it, they rebel. They support a Donald Trump. They vote to leave the European Union. Whatever the hell they need to do to strike back, they will do it. Government's job is to govern in such a way that that situation never arises. And we've got it here. We've got it within the United States. We've got a situation where one political party, the Republican Party, claims that government's job is to protect their freedom, their property, their investment rights, their overseas investments, their ability to relocate factories in different parts of this country and indeed out of the country and other parts of the world in order to reduce costs and make them more competitive. This government, our government, has a responsibility to protect their interests all over the world as they invest in this new global economy. And it is to protect their investment that we get involved in these regional wars. Terrorism, international terrorism, is the result of a foreign policy driven in this country by a felt need to support the priority interests of corporate America. We know that. We've seen it over and over again. The worst part of this is that the founders warned us ahead of this. They warned us about this. They told us this can happen. And they told us that it's going to take the shrewdest, most talented leaders in Republican government in order to guarantee that we never reach a situation which would be the situation that we're in. For many people, Donald Trump is their protest vote. People love him because of what he says. He says things and calls people names that if they wish that they could say and that they could use, but they're afraid to. They love this guy because you never know what he's going to say. What does that mean? It means that in politics, too often, what politicians say is exactly what you expect them to say. Why do they love Trump? Because he doesn't fit that formula. He says damn well what he pleases, when he pleases. He goes on attack. He's vicious. He's critical. Sometimes he's racist. Sometimes he's sexist. Doesn't matter. What Madison told us was that it's going to take a special kind of leader to make sure that the government never gets us into these kinds of situations. But here we are. So the question I ask you is, what is the solution? What's the answer? What does government need to do in order to not get us into this kind of a situation? Let me give you an example of some of the things government needs to do. Each of these items is contained in the platform adopted by the Democratic Party here in West Virginia 2 weekends ago. If you've heard a lot of it before, it's because most of it became part of Bernie Sanders' campaign. A 15-hour minimum wage, reliable, affordable broadband access for everybody, movement towards universal single-payer health care, movement towards the idea that health care is a human right, not a privilege that goes only to those who can afford to pay for it. A ban on for-profit prisons. Repeal of permitless concealed carry laws in terms of guns. West Virginia passed legislation. The governor signed it. Here in this state, anybody who reaches a certain age can carry a weapon. No training, no license, no registration, nothing. So the position here is to repeal that legislation. Opposition to fracking and mountaintop removal. Protection of people's access to clean water. Opposition to job-killing international trade agreements. Reversal of Citizens United for the public funding of elections. The medical use of marijuana. Many of these things have been inclusions in Bernie Sanders' position papers. What's the issue here? I would suggest that the issue here is not the specifics of what's in there. The issue is the overall sense and direction of what they mean. If you take all of these things and look at them as one, in one package, what this program proposes is an agenda where government's priority is people, all the people, the needs of people, not the needs of corporations, not the needs of shareholders of corporations, not the needs of CEOs, not the offshore interests of the very rich. The needs and concerns of people, human beings. Many of you know that I basically am running for the House of Delegates here in West Virginia. I entered the political fray. The reason I did it was for this. Because the direction that the state and this nation is heading is wrong. It's suicidal. It's going to produce something probably worse than the British vote to leave the European Union. We have got to get people in government who see government's job as to represent all the people, not just the few at the top. We have got to get government out of the idea that you give the very wealthy, the people at the top, total freedom and all the breaks, and the benefits will trickle down to everybody else. We know that they don't trickle. If there's any trickling going on, it's uphill, not down. Not only that, but we know that the people who are benefiting from the current conditions are labeling this as socialism. They're claiming that this is radical. Bernie Sanders can't win. His ideas are too idealistic. He'll break the budget. It's unreasonable expenses. A massive public jobs, rebuilding and repairing our infrastructure. The creation of 13 million well-paying jobs with benefits and retirement benefits and health care. It'll break the bank. It'll cost trillions, the conservatives, the Republicans say. The fact of the matter is, up until the last 25 to 30 years, public colleges and universities in this country were almost free. Talk to your uncles and your dads and the people, the older generation. Find out what it cost them to go to WVU, West Virginia University, or to go to college in the 1950s and 60s with the GI Bill and all of this other legislation, all these government efforts, special government efforts to give people the assistance they needed to make it and to have hope and to see the American dream as something that was for them. It's all gone. It all started to go in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan, and it's gone further and further downhill since then. We've talked over and over about the election in this country taking shape as the idea of both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders appealing to the anti-establishment vote. What does that mean? The vote to leave the EU in Great Britain was an anti-establishment vote. The vote for Donald Trump is an anti-establishment vote. The support for Bernie Sanders is an anti-establishment vote. And the assumption that all of these Sanders people are just going to move over and support Hillary is just that. It's an assumption. It may not work. The only thing that makes it likely that it probably will work is that Donald Trump is the alternative. And most of the Sanders people can't stomach that. But the fact of the matter is, what the Sanders people are after, what they are advocating, is a totally new focus, totally new set of priorities for government at all levels. Government, once again, has to be returned to governing in the public interest, making its priority the public good, the common good, not the good of the few, not the good of corporations, not the tax breaks associated with the tax loopholes, not the Citizens United decision, which allows the wealthy in this country to buy elections. and to threaten political loyalty by threatening to use their wealth to defeat candidates who don't vote the way they're supposed to vote, the way they're told to vote. We are seeing the existence of plutocracy. We are seeing the destruction of our republic. We are seeing the shredding of everything that Madison and Hamilton and the other founders put together. We're seeing all of it jeopardized. And we absolutely have to take steps to make sure that we turn things into another direction. I think what we're looking at overseas in Great Britain right now is an example of what can happen here. It's an example of what can happen. When President Obama made the speech in which he expressed confidence that the people of Great Britain would vote the right way, that was a kiss of death on this vote. That made it certain that these people in Great Britain would do everything that they can do to vote to leave the EU. Let me share with you an article that appeared in the New York Times on June 17th, a week before the British vote on membership in the European Union. It's an article that appeared in the British newspapers. It's an argument for voting to leave the EU. The author, Andrew Roberts. This is what he says. This is what the people of Great Britain are reading. On June 23rd, the British people will be going to the polls to choose whether they want to continue with the present system whereby 60% of British laws are made in Brussels and foreign judges decide whether those laws are legitimate or not, or whether we want to strike out for our own independence and the right to make all of our own laws and have our own British judges decide upon them. It's about whether we can recapture the right to deport foreign Islamist hate preachers and terrorist suspects, or whether under European human rights legislation they must continue to reside in the UK, often at taxpayers' expense. The European Union is currently experiencing migration on a scale not seen since the late 17th century, with hordes of young, mostly male Muslims sweeping from the southeast into the heart of Europe. Angela Merkel invited them in, and that might be fine in Germany. But why should they have the right to settle in Britain as soon as they get a European passport? Surely, this is an issue on which the British people and they alone have the right to decide, without the intervention of President Obama, who adopted his haughtiest professional manner when lecturing us to stay in the EU. Before making the naked threat that we would be sent, quote, to the back of the queue, the back of the line, in any future trade deals if we had the temerity to vote to leave. And then Roberts goes through all the examples from past history about the fact that Great Britain doesn't belong at the back of the line because Great Britain came to our defense against Hitler. He cites Winston Churchill. He cites Churchill's policies in the 1940s. He cites the degree of investments, British investments, that are in the United States, all of it. Basically, what he's doing is he's appealing to British nationalism. He's appealing to extreme nationalism. He's appealing to people by telling them that they can throw the damn world out, that they can get rid of Europe, they can get rid of all the foreigners, all the radicals, all the terrorists, all the trade. They can keep their jobs rather than see all their jobs leave the country. This is the kind of propaganda that James Madison encouraged his colleagues to not allow to happen. When people are this excited and this emotional, that's not the time that David Cameron should have allowed them to have a referendum on whether they wanted to stay in the EU or not. Because it creates an opportunity for articles like this, for people like this to explain and tell the people of Great Britain what they must do to say no more. Yesterday, I made reference to the fact that there was a chart, a graph, on television yesterday morning on the Morning Joe program on MSNBC, in which it showed a tremendous spike in Google requests on the word Brexit in Great Britain after the election over this past weekend. The implication of that is that many of the people who voted to leave the EU didn't really know what the hell they were voting on. All they knew is what they read in the papers, what Roberts and people like him are telling them. Stand up to Obama, stand up to Europe, stand up to Brussels. Let's get our independence back. Let's do this, people. And they did it. And now it's clear that they really don't know what to do now. How do we do this? What happens to us? So now we're beginning to see hints that from all over Great Britain are coming things, well, even though we've left the EU, we can still trade with them. We can still do business with them. We can't afford to turn our back. We can still maintain our relationships and our friendships with Europe. And in response to that, Angela Merkel of Germany made the comment and said, you can't vote to leave and then decide that you're going to still have all the benefits of being a member without any of the responsibilities. Her point is, you guys made the decision to leave, live with it. What this indicates is that an awful lot of good people, hardworking people, frightened people, are making decisions on things they don't understand. They are emotionally confused. They're doing what people they trust tell them to do without really knowing the facts. Now that they've done it, they're all going on Google trying to find out what the meaning is of what they did. We got an election coming up in this country in November. Millions of people have indicated that they're going to vote for a future in this country that they can't predict and they really don't know. All they know is it can't be any worse than what is. Because what is the people at the top are getting it all. And they're rendering us useless. They're casting us aside and saying, you don't have the skills and you don't have the ability and you don't have the potential and you don't have the work ethic and you don't have the stick-to-itiveness and you don't have the flexibility that we need. So there's no place for you. And against that, people are striking out. It seems to me that the message here is for Hillary. There's a good chance that Hillary can win this election. She's being attacked because she's a member of the establishment. What she's got to do is buy significant aspects or elements of the Sanders campaign. She's got to embrace the progressivism defined and explained by Bernie Sanders. She can't pretend. We're not talking about compromises and halfway measures and all of that. We're talking about serious efforts to change the direction of this country and once again find ways to bring people back into the system. Make this republic a government of inclusion, not exclusion. Let's start educating people, not basically to find out whether they have the potential and the talent that we're looking for and throwing everybody else aside. Let's start to approach education from the point of view that we need to educate everybody. That everybody has to become self-sufficient in this country. Everybody has to learn, have the skills and the ability to take care of themselves and their family. Everybody deserves a shot. Everybody has something to contribute. Everybody needs to feel that they're making significant contributions to their communities, that their life matters, that their work matters, that their craft, whatever it might be, matters. We have got to find ways to make this republic human again. We have got to stop allowing psychopathic corporations to make major decisions that affect human beings by the millions solely on the basis of what's best for the bottom line. The Pope told us we can't continue to do that. We're destroying the planet. And we know the reaction from conservatives that the Pope's encyclical received. We have got to start taking the Pope seriously. We've got to take Bernie Sanders seriously. We have got to embrace what he says. What I'm hearing on cable news and talk shows is that what Bernie Sanders is holding out for before he endorses Hillary is a couple of paragraphs in the platform. And one of the commentators made a comment this morning and said, all he's looking for is a couple of paragraphs in a document that nobody will read. Nobody will even remember a week after it's adopted. Well, let me tell you, if these things make it into that platform, Hillary better follow up on them and better do it. Because if she doesn't, then we're going to experience fallout in this country that's going to make the British vote to leave the European Union seem rather inconsequential and significant. Let's look at what the Republican Party over the months and years has stood for in this country. One article I read says they aren't a political party. They're the equivalent of a religious cult. They're talking about rights, the right to carry, the right to protect yourself, the right to shoot other people, the right to discriminate against other people who are different than you are. That's not a Republican. That's not a political party in a republic. Cult. Donald Trump is not a. He's a product of that ideology. They created him. Now they're trying to find a way to live with him because they've concluded they can't live without him because he's going to get the nomination. End of story for today. It's 59 minutes after the hour. I want to thank you if you've put up with this. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that you've gotten something out of it. I want to thank you. I want to invite you back to tomorrow. We'll be back at our regular starting time. Thank you so very much. Be safe and good day.